There will be a presentation of the team Lifeguard with the title Legal Considerations for the Protection of Maritime Refugees. Ladies and gentlemen, let's watch the introduction video.
Hello everyone, we are Team Lifeguard. Our team name Lifeguard illustrates our passion towards saving more lives in the high seas.
It is an absolute honor to take part in this prestigious competition.
We anticipate fruitful conversation today. Thank you very much.
Honorable judges and distinguished delegates, we are Team Lifeguard, and it is our utmost honor to deliver you with the legal considerations for the protection of maritime refugees. Rescue at sea is becoming more of a pressing issue in modern society. In our first case, the Tampa affair, the ship complied to its legal obligations and rescued over 400 asylum seekers from a sinking ship. However, the Australian government denied the Tampa permission to land any of the rescued refugees on Australian soil, endangering both the crew and the persons rescued. The same pattern can also be observed in our second case, the Mascatian incident. The ship fell under crisis after being denied entry to Italian, Libyan, Maltese, and Tunisian waters. Throughout the whole process, the company had to suffer over $1.7 million of loss. Ladies and gentlemen, we can no longer withhold the alleviation of the international maritime refugee crisis. It is a threat against human rights and human lives. It is a matter persistently relevant in one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. It is a challenge against the commercial status of ships and to the conditions of sailors involved in the rescue process. But most importantly, it is an issue that could and should be solved by the International Maritime Organization. The provisions and duties listed under international law makes it very clear that protecting maritime refugees fall under the jurisdiction of this organization. This is due to the fact that the rescue and protection of maritime refugees not only concerns the spirit of SOLAS and SAR, but also touches upon the realm of commercial shipping and maritime safety. The IMO has indeed made relevant efforts regarding this matter. It has reviewed and looked upon several guidelines and treatments for persons rescued at sea. Also, relevant amendments to SOLAS and SAR have been proposed, along with interagency efforts being made with UNHCR. Especially this legal document here is worth noting. It calls upon the duty of member states to provide a place of safety and encourages coastal states and their rescue coordination centers to work together. However, much of the discussion held so far holds clear limits. What we need in this situation is a holistic approach. Practical implementation must be made based on thorough legal assessment of SOLAS and SAR in light of UNCLOS and international law. Relevant legal issues would be delivered by my colleague.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and may I refer you to paragraph 10 to 16 of the booklet, page 35. Saving lives at sea. Where does the legal consideration start? Our starting point is the consideration of search and rescue. The term rescue refers to the duty to render assistance as contained in UNCLOS Article 98. This duty to render assistance can be divided into three constituent obligations. 1, the obligation to proceed to assistance. 2, the very obligation to provide assistance. And 3, the obligation to deliver to a place of safety. The third obligation to deliver is a twofold obligation. First, the obligation is imposed on ships to actually deliver the persons to a place of safety. And second, the obligation is imposed on states to relieve the ships. In other words, the performance of the duty to render assistance necessitates cooperation between states and ships. However, the performance of the duty to render assistance is impeded by the problematic legal interpretation of the term place of safety. The current understanding is captured in the guidelines provided by the MSC, which does substantiate the provisions of SOLAS and SAR. Yet the term place of safety, as provided by the guidelines, is still technically and legally problematic. It is technically problematic because guidelines are not essentially legally binding and therefore permits deviations. It is legally problematic because first, SAR operations under the guidelines is still heavily dependent on state cooperation, and second, the guidelines provide that the place of safety may not be on land, which means that the duty to deliver can merely be deferred. The effects of this is that ships will hesitate to perform their duty to render assistance, which, as a result, augments the potential of loss of lives at sea. This recalls the need for a holistic approach, as a legal ambiguity becomes a practical, real-life issue. Interception is another issue threatening the lives of the most unprotected. One may ask what interception is, which is exactly our point. There is no university-accepted definition. UNHCR documents propose that the term interception refers to the state practice encompassing all measures applied by a state outside its national territory in order to prevent, interrupt, or stop persons without the required documentation. So why do states use interception? It is in fact not entirely unprovided for, legally speaking, as you may see here. It must also be emphasized that though we have phrased it as a legal issue, the practice of interception does have positive benefits in that it is used to combat illegal activities such as human trafficking at sea. Regardless, the issue at hand is as follows. Despite the positive benefits, the current lack of a legal definition extenuates the scope of state practice, which may have the effects of 1. Re-endangering people's lives, and 2. Impeding the establishment of accountability for safety of life at sea. There are also human rights concerns, as interception may not guarantee the due process of law and may be questionable in the light of the principle of non-refoulement. So far, we have established that there are legal impediments in our efforts to save lives at sea, which was made manifest by the issue of maritime refugees. One may ask now and then, can we not make do with what we got? Methods of implementing and interpreting a treaty is provided by the treaty itself or the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties of 1969. Can the Vienna Convention come to our rescue? Considering the principles contained in VCLT, the answer is a resounding no. The ordinary meaning of place of safety and interception, or the context of the conventions and their purposes do not offer us much help. Team Lifeguard's proposal is holistic and simultaneous. It is a twofold approach. And before we go on, we would like to stress that our next stage is examination of the interpretive guidelines provided by MSC and UNHCR. But as highlighted already, they are not binding and retain some issues mentioned earlier. What should we do then? Well, drafting a new treaty is time-consuming and impractical. Thus, amendment, as we propose, is the only legally advisable and practically viable option we have. Our holistic and simultaneous approach is a twofold. First, our proposal leads to the establishment of a consolidated legal basis. And second, upon that consolidated legal basis is a complementary practical measures, which will be elaborated by my colleague. The twofold approach, as mentioned, will consist in 3 steps. First, the legal committee is to examine the issues highlighted in the context of international law. Second, based on the findings, an LEG and MSC joint working group in close reference to the IMO UNHCR interagency group will draft an updated guideline on the treatment of persons rescued at sea. The third step is a culmination of the first 2. In this step, MSC and LEG will draft resolutions and in turn make amendments to SOLAS and SAR. We shall begin with step 1. In this stage, the legal committee will review SOLAS and SAR in consideration of other branches of international law. This stage is relevant to ST 7.1 and OW5. Here is the draft resolution for step 1, which we propose should be considered by the legal committee. In summary, it tries to achieve first, the collection of information on state practice relevant to SOLAS and SAR, and second, the review and analysis of other possible legal issues, leading to a total review of SOLAS and SAR. I shall now hand over to my wonderful colleague who will give even more answers to our problems.
We shall now progress to the second phase of our initiative. The MSc and the LEG will be merged into a joint working group. The group will maintain close ties with the IMO UNHCR interagency group to formulate additional guidelines regarding rescue operations. This is what we suggest as the definition of place of safety. The same details are available in page 39, Annex 2-1 we previously submitted. The term place of safety is now articulated by a degree of ambiguity, which created a legislative void. In consequence, refugees were often transferred from one vessel to another, unable to embark onto land. Therefore, this definition underscores the necessity of embarkation onto land. Furthermore, we introduced the definition of interception as displayed on the screen. It is also available on page 39. In light of the legislative void, we propose a definition of interception revolving around the adoption of temporary refugee status. Ladies and gentlemen, we assert the pressing necessity of temporary refugee status. This status serves to ease the difficulties of refugees during the screening process. The process is now fragmentized into two distinct stages, which prolongs the period as long as anyone can imagine. By granting temporary refugee status, we aim to streamline the process into a single step. We believe this measure will alleviate the burden of maritime refugees and provide much-needed relief. Allow us to advance to the final phase of our initiative. In this step, we delve into the practical approaches based on the legal framework step before. The MSc and the LEG will craft amendments to SOLAS and SAR conventions in order to visualize the outcomes. For Annex 3, the following strategies are distinctly outlined. These involve temporary refugee status, regional RCCs, and reparation system. The first suggestion is the aforementioned temporary refugee status. By formally incorporating this status, we prevent coastal states from disguising interception as rescue. Under this framework, all coastal states shall transfer the distressed survivors to a designated place of safety. Moreover, by simplifying the screening process, refugees will be able to undergo the procedure expeditiously. In full respect of the sovereign rights of states, we acknowledge their determination to either reconfirm or withdraw. The second suggestion is the establishment of regional RCCs. Regional RCCs are organs above national RCCs overseeing all rescue operations among a certain SAR region. Regional RCCs shall designate certain countries to accept refugees considering the refugee acceptance rate. The regional RCC would also report to the IMO on the status of maritime refugee acceptance. By such roles, we aim to reinforce the accountability of coastal states to rescue refugees in distress. Annex 3 also has the same details. The last suggestion is the implementation of a reparation system. Let us provide an overview. As of today, P&I insurance and UNHCR cover refugee-related expenses. However, gaps exist in addressing actual losses. This circumstance discourages shipmasters from participating in rescue operations. Therefore, we propose a three-party approach involving the IMO. IMO should also collect contributions from state parties to compensate for delay-related losses. By considering the practical merits, IMO can further pursue the ultimate goal of the protection of refugee rights. Annex 3 also suggests the necessity for a compensation instrument. Today, Team Lifeguard proposed a twofold holistic approach. First, we propose the establishment of the legal definition of rescue and interception. Second, under the consolidated legal framework, we asserted three practical measures, which were the assignment of temporary refugee status, regional RCCs, and compensation system. Ladies and gentlemen, this approach takes into consideration not only the refugee rights, but also the individual circumstances of coastal states, shipping companies, and shipmasters. The protection of refugee rights is not just an isolated case.
It is a universal emblem of our dedication to the intrinsic value of every human being. I urge each of you, ladies and gentlemen, to reevaluate our shared humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Please give them a big applause. Okay, and there will be a Q&A session. And first question is from Professor Lee. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. When I have a question. When there are some areas or continents, such as Africa or Middle East, in which more people become refugees than any other reasons from time to time due to local issues such as terror war or act of God, natural disasters. And well, in that case, Regional Rescue Coordination Center can actively or effectively work with those kind of refugees in dealing with issues of interception of a member nation to refugees. Do you think any legal measures, if it's enforced by any international agency such as IMO, can be feasible in reality when each state has different social infrastructure and different economic levels and different awareness levels of perceiving refugees?
And I think that is an excellent question, because that is precisely the case in the Mediterranean right now because of the issues in Lebanon, Israel, well, Ukraine. Mediterranean is completely the embodiment of what you have just suggested. Regional RCCs, the feasibility of it may be questioned. Will the states accept and will they follow the RCCs? To consider that, I think we should first consider, why do states not receive migrants, which makes us actually bring forward this proposal. The reason is that because they are overcrowded in terms of maritime refugees. So Malta and Italy, they are the first point of contact in many of the situations, which is why they are unwilling to take on more. But with that, the regional RCCs take that into consideration, collect the data to actually prevent the overcrowding. So for these countries and for shipping states, so for coastal states and shipping states, there are incentives to actually join this process of a joint RCC. And I think that will be our answer to the question.
So your kind of solution is setting up joint RCCs in the specific regions such as Middle East and Mediterranean. And then how are we gonna kind of talk each country into establishing those kind of cooperative RCCs?
Right, I'm taking all the spotlight. With that, I think we have to distinguish why do states join into, well, partaking in this joint RCCs. Well, there are shipping states such as Norway, Denmark, who has actually experienced the problems of maritime refugees in its fullest extent, and there are coastal states who wants to not be involved in this situation. Now, there are incentives for both. For coastal states, I think I've explained earlier, so they can actually be prevented from being overcrowded. Are there incentives for shipping states? Well, I think there are, because the shipping industry plays a heavy part on its state's economy. And with that in mind, the Muscatine incident shows that there are considerable amounts of fiscal losses when dealing with maritime refugees, and actually the ability to disembark itself is in question. And that is the precise aspect which is causing the fiscal losses. So with that in mind, the shipping states has the incentives to participate as well. So I think different incentives for different countries will lure them in to cooperate in joint RCCs.
So kind of making a two-tier approach to each country, because they have different levels of interest and situation. Is that what you said?
Well, there may be various kinds of contexts. So what we have acknowledged in mind was about the shipping circumstances and also the over-influx of refugees. And to clarify, the the real documents, we found that states actually said, I would like to state the exact words, states should cooperate the fullest extent possible to prevent and suppress unsafe practices in conformity with the international law of the sea and all generally accepted relevant international instruments. So I think that states are calling for help for international agencies to actually get assistance from them. So I think this may be our answer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And are there any questions? Yeah, Dr. Park, please.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting issue. However, it is difficult issue to international community as of the IMO. IMO also to want to the treat these issues. The IMO characteristic is to the public service, the public law rulemaking body. However, is many countries is pressed to the IMO to make a resolution or the regulation. And the problem is this is to the political issue. And so in your to the presentation is necessity. Your team mentioned the necessity for a compensation instrument. And so how to make a legally binding instrument at IMO.
First of all, thank you for the wonderful and insightful question. We would like to first of all point out the fact that we want to make a fund that is actually funded by the member states of the IMO, so which is actually legally binded by the International Maritime Organization themselves. And also we want to point out the fact that a lot of countries will be willing to contribute to the fundings because, as our wonderful colleagues have pointed out above, these shipping states and the coastal states both have, even if their incentives are different, they both have an incentive to actually contribute and fix this issue. And we believe that is one of the reasons why the IMO has formulated an interagency effort with UNHCR on the issue of maritime safety.
Yeah, just one
Okay.
the comment is to the to the UNCLOS is the convention of the IMO relevant maritime convention, and so maybe you needed to consider to the captains to the law and responsibility to the search and rescue. However, is to make a consensus to the in private sector and public sector. So I would like to recommend it to the totally to the how to make a consensus and between among the IMO member states. Yeah, that is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And are there any questions on the floor? Okay, Team Maserati, please.
Thank you for your presentation about SAR and SOLAS. I have the one question. The UK's maritime commercial law, which is representative model of maritime law, stipulates that there is an obligation to pay compensation for voluntary maritime rescue. Also, the damage to a vessel from a maritime rescue can be extreme. But as Team Lifeguard mentioned, there is an obligation under IMO and general companies to pay compensation and service fees for this. And there is no obligation under P&I to help refugees at sea. Why should the IMO P&I insurers pay for refugees rescue?
Well, actually, we wanted to point out the fact that the P&I insurance themselves are actually paying for the coverage of the refugee rescue and the status quo. But what we're saying is that the existing P&I insurance, the amount of money covered by the existing P&I insurance is not enough in the status quo. So what we're saying is that we want to make an individual fund under the IMO and utilize the P&I insurance, funds from the UNHCR, and funds from the IMO in order to offer not it be a full coverage, but several sufficient coverage that will be able to compensate for the goodwills and the rescue process of the ship owners.
Yeah, just to chime in, actually in this point, temporary refugee status is very important because if the refugees are not acknowledged in conventions, then before we mentioned about the three parties reparation system, and we said that UNHCR can actually compensate them. But if they are not acknowledged as refugees, then the UNHCR won't compensate the shipmasters. So in this case, we were actually looking forward to compensate the shipmasters and incentivize them to actually actively participate in rescue operations. That is why we talked about and proposed the temporary refugee status.
And the final addition would be that we look for the interagency efforts as called on by the Assembly resolutions previously, so that we can cover all stakeholders relevant in the issue of maritime refugees without actually neglecting a single party. So that's why I think it's complex, but I believe that this will help solve the issue.
Okay, thank you so much for your question and answer. And unfortunately, it's time to end this Q&A session, and let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much, Team Lifeguard.